You're now listening to All Hog Sports, covering all Arkansas Razorback sports, such as football, basketball, baseball, and much more. Now, here's your host for today's show, Sam Stimson.
Now, Arkansas will travel to Florida to take on the Gators. However, they will be without head coach Sam Pittman as he tested positive for COVID-19. All Razorback Nation is hoping that Coach has a fast and healthy recovery from COVID-19. However, because he would not be at the game, defensive coordinator Barry Odom will be the interim head coach for this week. And if you look at Barry Odom's track as a head coach, he was the head coach at Mizzou for 4 years. He's got a lot of experience, and arguably anybody in the SEC, this is one of the guys that I would love to see step up into a job. It's also, he will probably be rumored to a couple places as a possible head coach candidate after this year, after the way he flipped around our defense. So it should be interesting to see him lead on this Razorback team, as he will be on the field instead of the booth for this game, as he will be the head coach. Now, if you like what you're hearing on today's episode, please follow my Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at AllHogSportsPod. And I also just created a call-in voicemail line, so you can call into this podcast, and I will play your call on air, and you can call in at 479-222-2480. Again, that's 479-222-2480. But kicking it off with the game day information, the Arkansas Razorbacks play at 6 o'clock on ESPN. Now, all this is subject to change because this game could possibly not be played if we start seeing more positives out of Arkansas, or the other team's game get postponed like we've already seen 3 SEC games do. So it's possible that the time of this game, the network, and all kinds of stuff could change. However, as of right now, 6 o'clock on ESPN. It's obviously at the Swamp.
Now, for the Arkansas Razorbacks.
Felipe Franks has to continue doing his thing, as he has played really well all season. Obviously, the grad transfer from Florida will be having a little bit of a revenge game that I'll talk about in the history section. However, he's been doing really good out here. 238 yards per game, only 3 interceptions on the year, and he's not throwing any picks in key moments, and his awareness of the wide receivers and a good time to throw or a good time to scramble has been really, really incredible for the Razorbacks, and it obviously makes it easier for the offense to roll around a good quarterback, as obviously last year we didn't have a solid QB, as you played 5 different QBs, and when you have a solid QB who's playing all the time, it's easier to predict the offense and establish a running game, a passing game, and all of that. Obviously, though, I've talked about it so much on the show, the Franks-Burks connection is going to have to continue going. And then another thing I think for Franks is he's going to need a little bit more help in the pocket from the offensive line. I stressed that towards the end of the Tennessee recap because I felt like the offensive line didn't really play too hot. And for the offensive line to roll in a better spot for Franks, it's going to make it easier for him to stay in the pocket, throw the ball, and make better plays. So I definitely think that needs to happen. But with Treylon Burks, I mean, you just got to feed him the ball. When Felipe Franks targets Treylon Burks, Felipe Franks has a perfect 158.3 QBR. That is ridiculous to think about. There's only 2 wide receivers in the whole entire college football world that are doing this, and one of them is from Ohio State, and he's played 3 games. So that shows how good the Burks and Franks connection has been all year, as Burks has 31 catches with 5 touchdowns. Obviously, though, other wide receivers are still going to have to do work in this Razorback offense, such as Mike Woods and De'Vion Warren. I expect both of those guys to get 3 or 4 catches and play a role in the offense, especially in the red zone. However, there is a split backfield between both of these guys, Smith and Boyd. They both have 70 carries on the year. Now, if you remember, Boyd was injured against Mississippi State and set out a game because of it. However, they both are at different yardage totals, as Smith is at 323 yards and Boyd is at 253 yards. Now, they both have 70 carries, but I think Boyd's dip in production can be explained by the fact that he hasn't had a lot of playing time, especially when he's been at 100%. So it makes sense, and in my opinion, in this scenario, just do whatever works. If we can put Boyd out there and he's running all over them, there's no reason to take him out. If we put Smith out there and he's running all over them, no reason to take him out. Just do whatever works for the offense to establish a running game, because as we've seen, if a running game isn't established, Franks and the whole entire offense is just really uneven. It hurts us a ton. So in my opinion, do whatever is necessary to get a running game going And in the long-term effect, it really doesn't matter as long as we're picking up yards, holding onto the football safely, and producing, really. This Arkansas defense, though, is established on turnovers. 12 interceptions on the year, 3 fumble recoveries, 3 pick sixes. Defense has to create turnovers against Florida, and I don't think it's going to be easy against Kyle Trask. If you look at the Texas A&M game, as Kellen Mond and Isaiah Spiller, the quarterback and running back respectively, did not turn over the ball at all to this Arkansas defense. So it obviously made it a lot harder for us, and if you look at the final scoreboard, it would explain why we lost 42-31, because they didn't turn over the ball at all. This defense, though, has to create turnovers for anything to work, as the yards per game and points per game stats really aren't that good at 26 points per game and 402 yards per game. So for this defense to really click and be successful, they have to create turnovers. And they did that in the closing moments in the Tennessee game, getting 2 interceptions in the fourth quarter. For this defense to work out, they're going to have to try to force fumbles and try and force Kyle Trask to throw into situations where we may be able to pick off and get an interception. So it's going to be difficult for them to do that, as they don't have a ton of depth on the defensive back, as Jared Jacobs and McKellen both opted out of the season, which makes it a lot harder because your starters are always out there. They may be getting beat and they may be getting tired, and it's hard when you have low depth. I mean, you look at the Georgia game, and after we had low depth, nothing was able to be established at all, and we struggled a ton because of that. So having depth is very, very important for this Razorback team, and keeping that depth healthy is also important, as we're relatively healthy on defense, which is really good to see. I'll talk about the injury report later, though. Their defense, though, because of all the turnovers, has the second highest efficiency rate in the SEC, only to be behind Georgia, which has been the best defense in the SEC for multiple years now. So that makes sense, but on this defensive side of the ball, the guys that are really helping the Razorbacks are Grant Morgan and Bumper Poole. If you look at the SEC leading tacklers, Grant Morgan is in first at 70 tackles, and he really only has one working arm. I talk about that every week, and I will continue to until he has that off, because he has been a beast all over the field. He's a great tackler. He's been able to force QB pressure in certain situations and then lay off and defend a player. So it's really good to see a versatile linebacker like him with one arm. Bumper Poole, though, is second at 64 tackles, and he actually missed a whole game because of cracked ribs against Ole Miss, and then we had the bye week after that, and he returned. So it's really impressive to see 2 Razorbacks up there, especially considering one of them was hurt and missed a game, and then one is hurt and has just been fighting his injury throughout the whole entire year, really, and is showing how to be fierce and, how to be a Razorback, truly. However, the defending SEC Player of the Week, Jalen Catalan, had 58 tackles on the year. He was the SEC Player of the Week last week after he got an interception and 11 tackles, and the week before that he was disqualified for targeting. And if you saw that, losing him made it hard for the defense because he's a leader in that backside where the safeties are, where the corners are, at such a young age as a redshirt freshman, and it's really awesome to see him do that. And then it's also great to see him emerge into a big-time role, because even though he is young, he's one of the guys on this team that is playing super, super well. Obviously, he has 58 tackles on the year, like I said, with 2 interceptions and a fumble recovery. Some of the guys on this defense, though, Hudson Clark, he's yet to have a big-time game since the Ole Miss game. I don't think he's a one-hit wonder yet, but I think he'll come back down to reality we've already seen. I don't think he's bad. I don't think he's this elite corner lockdown guy, but I think his ability to force turnovers is definitely something to keep note of for any quarterback in the SEC. Linebacker Hayden Henry is also a guy to keep out for, and Julius Coates really put the pressure on Tennessee's offensive line last week. Should be impressive this week. And then Joe Fucha is a quick guy, and he's been all over the field for the Razorbacks throughout this year. Definitely safety to keep eyes on, as well as Catalan. Special teams, though, has to improve. Dead last in the SEC in efficiency rate, and just overall probably ranked there. A.J. Reed has to be able to make 20-yard field goals. If we're going to rely on him outside of 45 yards, he's going to have to make those. Special teams, though, is going to have to play well for this game, as we see when we play good teams like Georgia, Auburn, and Texas A&M. If special teams aren't playing well, it's hard for the whole team to do that. So special teams definitely has to step up. Now it's the Arkansas Razorbacks
versus
the Florida Gators. The Florida Gators offense is on fire. Kyle Trask is leading this really good offense. Kyle Trask has 369 yards per game with 495 total yards per game in this whole entire offense. that he basically commands 42 points per game as well. Second highest efficiency rate in the SEC. Some really good stats from that offense. It's going to be hard for the Razorbacks to control this just because of how good this offense has been all year, and I would expect that Kyle Trask continues this trend as he's looking like he could possibly be a top 5 draft pick in the NFL. He definitely wants to put on a show these last few games of the season because he wants to get to that spot as any other quarterback would, and he's having a great year, 1,815 yards, 22 touchdowns, and only 3 interceptions. Really good numbers out of him. I expect him to give the Razorbacks secondary a tough time, as we saw against Kellen Mond, a really good quarterback who's probably going to get drafted into the NFL as well. Kellen Mond was able to just pick apart the Razorback secondary and basically bully him around and get what he wanted and get a ton of completions. Kellen Mond put on an absolute show against the Razorbacks. And I think Barry Odom and the defensive guys will realize what happened and how they got exposed during that and make some adjustments to the defense and try to improve some things so a good quarterback like Trask isn't able to expose this team. But Kyle Pitts is his number one target for Kyle Trask. Now, Kyle Pitts is questionable for this game after he suffered a concussion injury against Georgia, and should be interesting if he plays or not, and it's definitely going to have a big role into this game. He has 24 catches for 414 yards and 8 touchdowns. Kyle Pitts is a total beast, and anytime he gets a 50-50 ball, it's not a 50-50 ball for him. It's a 100-0 ball. He's got that locked down. He's a great tight end. He's obviously one of Trask's number one targets. But on the ground, Dameon Pierce is leading. He has 49 carries for 221 yards with 4.5 yards averaging. And this Gators team averages 126 yards per game. And this is lucky for the Razorbacks because obviously the run defense hasn't been that good for the Hogs. So having a not-so-good run offense for the Gators makes it easier for the Razorbacks because they don't have to worry so much about the ground, and they can focus more on stopping Kyle Trask. But I would expect if Trask is kind of getting shut down by Arkansas, they're going to start to run the ball. So I think being able to adjust the defense is important for Barry Odom, and it's going to be a little bit harder because he's not going to be in the booth. However, I wouldn't expect anything else, really. I think there's a lot of positives and negatives, to the whole situation, but obviously having Pittman out for the Razorbacks makes it really hard for this team, and they definitely want to fight to get him that win. But Florida has so many options at wide receiver, it's ridiculous. Kadarius Toney has 29 catches on the year. Travion Grimes and Jacob Copeland are all guys to watch out for. It's kind of interesting because a lot of these guys Felipe Franks threw to previous year, so I think it's interesting to see if he goes up to Barry Odom and kind of tells them how the wide receivers work, their favorite routes and things like that, to prepare the defensive guys. I think it's an interesting situation to watch play out. The Gators defense really isn't super good, but it's not bad. They're improving week by week, averaging 402 yards per game, 29 points per game, and 6th in the SEC in defensive efficiency, but there's a pretty big drop-off from 5 and 6 there. And this Gators defense really didn't play that good against Texas A&M at all, but neither did ours. So I think you can't really judge any defense off of that because of how good A&M's offense is. And this is the game that they kind of got exposed in and got the idea of having a bad defense. But their defense really isn't that bad. I don't think they get enough credit. However, they have allowed 262 yards in the air per game, and they have 4 total touchdowns. A guy to watch out for is defensive back Sean Davis and the role he plays in the corner to try to stop a guy like Treylon Burks, who has been dominant for the Razorbacks, and even so dominant that Felipe Franks has a perfect passer rating when targeting Burks. It's going to be hard to do that as Burks is a very elusive wide receiver and probably one of the best I've ever seen step on campus at Arkansas in a decade probably. On the ground, though, the Gators are giving up 139 yards per game. Linebacker Ventrell Miller is the leading tackler on this team at 37 tacklers with 1 sack and 1 fumble recovery, and then linebacker Brenton Cox Jr. has 24 total tackles with 2 sacks and 1 fumble recovery. And this defense is improving rapidly. Each week it seems like a new scenario as they shut down Georgia this past week. Georgia had a 27% completion rate on offense, and you can blame that on Georgia's offense or Florida's defense. You can choose, but they are at full strength. They don't have any COVID cases, and that was a big thing against Missouri. They were missing guys because of COVID, but they were still able to stop that new Drinkwitz offense. So this defense isn't bad. It's improving rapidly, and it's going to be something to watch for how Briles reacts and draws up a game plan against the Gators this week. Moving on to the injury report, though, for Arkansas